Most people believe they know themselves. They'll tell you they're logical or emotional, practical or creative, introverted or extroverted. But what if everything you think you know about your personality is wrong? What if the way you see yourself is nothing more than a carefully constructed mask you've been wearing so long you've forgotten it's not your real face? Carl Jung, one of the most revolutionary minds in psychology, discovered something unsettling about human nature. He found that beneath our conscious awareness lies a psychological architecture so complex, so hidden from our daily experience, that most people live their entire lives without ever glimpsing their true selves. Jung identified 4 fundamental personality types that operate like invisible engines, driving every decision you make, every relationship you form, and every path you choose in life. But here's where it gets disturbing. Jung didn't just map out these personality types to help you feel better about yourself. He revealed them because he understood that most people are living as prisoners of their own minds, trapped in patterns they never chose, following scripts written by forces they don't understand. The personality type that dominates your psyche isn't just a quirky trait you can mention at parties. It's the lens through which you interpret reality itself. Think about this for a moment. Every thought you've ever had, every emotion you've ever felt, every choice you've believed was yours, all of it has been filtered through a psychological function you probably don't even recognize. You're not experiencing the world as it actually is. You're experiencing a version of reality shaped by mental processes that operate so automatically, so unconsciously, that you mistake them for truth itself. Jung spent decades studying the human mind, and what he discovered will make you question everything you think you know about yourself. He found that consciousness isn't one unified thing. Instead, it's made up of distinct psychological functions that work like different channels on a radio. Most people spend their lives tuned to just one channel, convinced that's all there is to hear. They never realize they're missing entire frequencies of human experience. The 4 personality types Jung identified aren't just academic categories. They're the fundamental ways human consciousness processes reality. There's the thinking type, driven by logic and analysis. The feeling type, guided by values and emotional truth. The sensation type, grounded in concrete facts and immediate experience. And the intuitive type, focused on possibilities and hidden meanings. Each type experiences a completely different version of the world, and each believes their version is the correct one. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. Your dominant personality type isn't your strength. It's your limitation. It's the psychological cage you've built around yourself without realizing it. While you're busy developing and relying on your preferred function, you're simultaneously suppressing and ignoring the other 3. You're living as a fraction of who you could be, convinced that this fraction represents your complete self. The truly unsettling part is how this happens without your awareness. From childhood, you were rewarded for displaying certain traits and discouraged from expressing others. If you showed logical thinking, you were praised as smart. If you expressed deep emotions, you might have been told you were too sensitive. If you lived in your imagination, perhaps you were called a dreamer who needed to be more practical. If you focused on details and facts, maybe they said you were missing the bigger picture. Slowly, systematically, you learned to suppress parts of yourself that didn't fit what others expected. You developed your acceptable personality type while pushing the others into the shadows of your unconscious mind. But those suppressed functions didn't disappear. They're still there, operating beneath the surface, influencing your life in ways you don't recognize. Jung called this hidden part of your personality the inferior function. It's the psychological type you understand least about yourself, the one that feels most foreign and uncomfortable. Yet it holds tremendous power over your life. When you're stressed, when you're overwhelmed, when your dominant function isn't working, your inferior function takes control. It erupts in ways that feel completely unlike your normal self, causing you to act in ways that surprise and disturb you. Have you ever found yourself behaving in a way that felt completely out of character? Maybe you're normally logical and analytical, but suddenly you became overwhelmed by emotions you couldn't control. Perhaps you're typically focused on harmony and relationships, but you lashed out with cold, cutting logic that shocked even you. These moments aren't personality flaws or temporary breakdowns. They're your inferior function breaking through, demanding attention you've been denying it for years. Most people spend their lives running from these uncomfortable moments, trying to get back to their familiar personality type as quickly as possible. They see their inferior function as an enemy to be defeated, rather than a part of themselves to be understood. But Jung knew something different. He understood that true psychological health, true wholeness, comes not from perfecting your dominant type, but from integrating all four functions into a balanced whole. This integration isn't comfortable. It requires you to venture into psychological territory that feels foreign and threatening. It means developing parts of yourself that you've spent years avoiding. For a thinking type, it means learning to trust emotions and values, even when they contradict logic. For a feeling type, it means embracing analytical thinking even when it disrupts harmony. For a sensation type, it means exploring abstract possibilities that can't be proven. For an intuitive type, it means paying attention to concrete details that seem irrelevant to the bigger picture. But here's what happens when you begin this integration process. You start to see that your personality type isn't who you are. It's simply how you've learned to navigate the world. You realize that all four functions exist within you, waiting to be developed and expressed. You discover capabilities you never knew you had, perspectives you never considered, and ways of being that feel both completely new and strangely familiar. Jung called this journey toward wholeness individuation. It's the process of becoming who you truly are by integrating all aspects of your personality, not just the parts that feel safe and familiar. It's about moving beyond the limited identity you've constructed and embracing the full spectrum of human psychological experience that exists within you. The journey isn't easy, and it's not for everyone. Most people prefer the comfort of their familiar personality type, even if it means living as a fraction of their potential. They'd rather stay in their psychological comfort zone than venture into the unknown territory of their complete self. But for those willing to undertake this exploration, Jung's personality types offer something invaluable, a map of the hidden landscape of human consciousness. Understanding your dominant personality type is just the beginning. The real transformation happens when you recognize it as both your greatest strength and your most significant limitation. When you see it not as your identity, but as one tool among many in the complex toolkit of human consciousness. When you realize that the other three types aren't foreign territories, but undeveloped aspects of your own psychological potential. In the next part of this exploration, we'll dive deep into each of the four personality types Jung identified. We'll examine how they operate, how they shape your experience of reality, and most importantly, how they limit your perception of what's possible. Because understanding your type isn't about finding a label that makes you feel better about yourself. It's about recognizing the invisible forces that have been shaping your life and learning how to transcend them. The question isn't which personality type you are. The question is, are you ready to discover who you could become if you stopped limiting yourself to just one way of being human? Because once you see the cage you've been living in, you can never quite unsee it. And that's when the real journey begins. Let's examine the four personality types Jung discovered, because each one reveals a different kind of prison people build around themselves without realizing it. These aren't just different ways of thinking. They're completely different realities, each with its own blind spots, its own forms of self-deception, and its own path to psychological imprisonment. The thinking type lives in a world of logic, analysis, and objective truth. These individuals believe that reason is the highest form of human functioning. They approach life like a complex equation waiting to be solved, breaking down problems into manageable components, seeking patterns and principles that explain how things work. To them, emotions are inconvenient static that interferes with clear reasoning. They value consistency, accuracy, and intellectual honesty above all else. But here's what thinking types don't realize about themselves. Their devotion to logic has become a defense mechanism against the messiness of human experience. They've learned to retreat into their minds whenever life becomes too complex, too emotional, or too unpredictable. They mistake their ability to analyze for actual understanding, confusing intellectual knowledge with lived wisdom. Watch a thinking type when they're confronted with strong emotions, either their own or someone else's. They become uncomfortable, almost panicked. They immediately try to rationalize the feelings away, to explain them logically, to solve them like problems. They can't simply sit with the raw reality of human emotion because their entire identity is built on the belief that everything can and should be understood through reason. This creates a profound disconnection from their own inner life. Thinking types often report feeling empty or hollow despite their intellectual achievements. They excel in their careers. They solve complex problems. They build impressive systems and structures. But they struggle with intimacy, with spontaneity, with the simple act of being present in their own emotional experience. Their inferior function, feeling, operates in the shadows, erupting unpredictably when their logical defenses break down. Suddenly, the calm, rational thinker becomes overwhelmed by emotions they can't control or understand. They might have explosive outbursts of anger, periods of deep depression, or intense reactions that seem completely disproportionate to the situation. These episodes terrify them because they reveal the existence of a part of themselves they've spent years denying. The feeling type lives in an entirely different universe. Their world is organized around values, relationships, and emotional truth. They navigate life through their heart, making decisions based on what feels right rather than what makes logical sense. They're exquisitely attuned to the emotional undercurrents around them, sensing tensions and harmonies that others miss entirely. Feeling types believe that human connection is the highest form of existence. They prioritize relationships over achievements, harmony over efficiency, authenticity over success. They can read people with uncanny accuracy, understanding motivations and needs that remain invisible to more logical types. They're the ones who remember birthdays, who notice when someone is struggling, who create the emotional glue that holds communities together. But feeling types have their own form of psychological imprisonment. They've become so dependent on emotional feedback from others that they've lost touch with their own individual needs and desires. They're constantly adjusting themselves to maintain harmony, sacrificing their authentic self to avoid conflict or disapproval. They mistake emotional intensity for truth, believing that if something feels strongly, it must be real and important. The tragedy of feeling types is that in their effort to maintain connection with everyone, they often lose connection with themselves. They become shapeshifters, adapting their personality to whatever the situation requires. They know what others need from them, but they have no idea what they need for themselves. They're experts at reading other people's emotions, but strangers to their own deeper motivations. Their inferior function, thinking, remains undeveloped, leaving them vulnerable to manipulation and poor decision-making. When pressed to make logical choices, they become anxious and uncertain. They might make decisions based purely on how they feel in the moment, without considering long-term consequences or objective realities. When their emotional world becomes overwhelming, they sometimes swing to the opposite extreme, becoming coldly logical in ways that feel foreign and uncomfortable to them. The sensation type inhabits yet another reality entirely. They live fully in the present moment, trusting their five senses above all else. Their world is concrete, practical, and immediate. They notice details others miss: the texture of fabric, the taste of food, the subtle changes in their environment. They're grounded in physical reality in a way that gives them tremendous stability and presence. Sensation types are the realists of Jung's system. They trust what they can see, touch, hear, and measure. They're skeptical of abstract theories and future possibilities, preferring to deal with what's actually happening right now. They excel at practical tasks, at creating comfortable environments, at responding to immediate needs and crises. They're often skilled with their hands, gifted at sports or crafts, naturally attuned to their physical bodies. But sensation types have built their own subtle prison. They've become so focused on immediate reality that they've lost touch with deeper meanings and future possibilities. They live in a world of surfaces, missing the symbolic and metaphorical dimensions of experience. They're so concerned with what is that they rarely consider what could be. This creates a different kind of emptiness. Sensation types often feel stuck, trapped in routines and patterns that no longer serve them. They know how to respond to what's happening now, but they struggle to envision different futures or deeper purposes. They're masters of the present moment, but prisoners of immediate circumstances. Their inferior function, intuition, represents everything they've learned to distrust. Abstract ideas, future possibilities, symbolic meanings, hidden connections, all of this feels threatening to their carefully constructed reality. When their intuitive function does break through, it often manifests as anxiety about the future, paranoid thoughts about hidden meanings, or overwhelming confusion about abstract concepts they can't grasp concretely. Finally, there's the intuitive type, living in a world of possibilities, patterns, and hidden meanings. They see beyond surface appearances to underlying structures and future potentials. They're drawn to ideas, theories, and abstract concepts. They think in metaphors and symbols, constantly making connections that others don't see. They're the visionaries, the innovators, the ones who imagine different ways of being and doing. Intuitive types are energized by potential rather than reality. They're more interested in what could happen than what is happening. They see patterns everywhere, finding meaning and significance in coincidences and connections that others dismiss as random. They're often creative, original thinkers who bring fresh perspectives to old problems. But intuitives have constructed their own form of psychological cage. They've become so focused on possibilities and meanings that they've lost touch with practical reality. They live in their heads, in imagined futures or abstract theories, while neglecting the immediate needs of their bodies and their daily lives. They're so busy seeing what could be that they often miss what actually is. This creates its own form of suffering. Intuitive types often feel misunderstood and isolated. Their insights seem obvious to them, but invisible to others. They struggle with practical tasks, with attention to detail, with following through on their brilliant ideas. They're perpetually frustrated by the gap between their vision and their ability to manifest it in concrete reality. Their inferior function, sensation, represents everything they've learned to devalue. Practical concerns, physical needs, concrete details, immediate realities. All of this feels boring and irrelevant compared to the rich world of possibilities in their minds. When their sensation function does emerge, it often manifests as obsessive concern with physical symptoms, compulsive attention to irrelevant details, or anxiety about practical matters they've been ignoring. Each of these four types represents a different way of being human, but also a different form of self-limitation. Each has developed one aspect of human consciousness while suppressing the others. Each believes their way of processing reality is superior, more accurate, more important than the alternatives, and each pays a price for this psychological specialization. The thinking type gains clarity but loses heart. The feeling type gains connection but loses direction. The sensation type gains stability but loses vision. The intuitive type gains insight but loses grounding. None of them is living as a complete human being. None of them is accessing their full psychological potential. This is the harsh truth Jung discovered about human personality. We don't choose our dominant type as much as it chooses us, often in response to early experiences that taught us which aspects of ourselves were acceptable and which needed to be hidden. We develop one function as a survival strategy, then mistake this adaptation for our true identity. But recognizing your type is only the beginning of the journey towards psychological wholeness. The real work begins when you start to see your dominant function not as your identity, but as your starting point, the place from which you can begin to explore the other dimensions of human consciousness that exist within you. The most disturbing realization about Jung's personality types isn't that you have one. It's that you've been living as if you only have one. You've spent years, maybe decades, perfecting your dominant function while systematically neglecting 3/4 of your psychological potential. You've become an expert in one way of being human while remaining completely illiterate in the other 3. But what happens when life demands more than your dominant function can provide? What happens when your carefully constructed psychological strategy stops working? This is where Jung's theory becomes not just intellectually interesting, but personally devastating. Because at some point, every person encounters situations that their dominant type simply cannot handle effectively. The thinking type encounters a crisis that cannot be solved through analysis. Maybe it's the death of a loved one, a betrayal that defies logical explanation, or a creative block that resists all systematic approaches. Suddenly, their greatest strength becomes irrelevant. Logic offers no comfort when facing the raw reality of loss. Analysis provides no guidance when navigating the irrational depths of human relationships. Their dominant function, the very thing they've built their identity around, leaves them completely helpless. The feeling type faces a situation that requires cold, objective decision-making. Perhaps it's a business negotiation where emotional considerations must be set aside, a legal dispute that demands factual evidence over personal values, or a leadership role that requires making unpopular but necessary choices. Their natural inclination toward harmony and emotional truth becomes not just useless but actively harmful. Their desire to please everyone leads to indecision. Their focus on feelings obscures crucial facts. Their strength becomes their weakness. The sensation type confronts a problem that cannot be solved through practical action. Maybe it's a philosophical crisis about the meaning of life, a creative challenge that requires abstract thinking, or a relationship issue that involves complex psychological dynamics. Their grounding in immediate reality provides no guidance for navigating abstract concepts. Their trust in concrete facts offers no help when dealing with symbolic meanings or future possibilities. They find themselves lost in territories their dominant function never mapped. The intuitive type encounters a situation that demands attention to immediate, practical details. Perhaps it's managing a household budget, dealing with a medical emergency that requires precise action, or completing a project that involves meticulous attention to concrete specifics. Their visionary insights become irrelevant when faced with mundane but essential tasks. Their ability to see possibilities offers no help when dealing with present realities. Their greatest gift becomes their greatest liability. These moments of functional breakdown aren't random accidents. They're inevitable consequences of psychological one-sidedness. Jung understood that life itself conspires to force us beyond the narrow confines of our dominant type. Reality is too complex, too multifaceted, to be navigated successfully through just one psychological function. But here's what makes these breakdowns so psychologically dangerous. When your dominant function fails you, you don't smoothly transition to using another function. Instead, you often regress to your inferior function in its most primitive, undeveloped form. This creates what Jung called an eruption of the unconscious, a psychological emergency, where the part of yourself you understand least suddenly takes control. The thinking type, faced with an emotional crisis they cannot analyze away, doesn't develop mature feeling. Instead, they become overwhelmed by childish emotions, throwing tantrums, making decisions based on hurt feelings, or becoming sentimentally attached to completely inappropriate things. Their emotions, because they've been suppressed for so long, emerge in their most immature form. The feeling type, forced to make logical decisions, doesn't develop mature thinking. Instead, they become rigidly dogmatic, clinging to oversimplified rules or making harsh judgments that completely ignore human complexity. Their thinking, because it's so undeveloped, manifests as crude black and white reasoning that would embarrass them in calmer moments. The sensation type, confronted with abstract challenges, doesn't develop mature intuition. Instead, they become paranoid about hidden meanings, obsessed with conspiracy theories, or overwhelmed by vague anxieties about future possibilities they cannot control. Their intuition, because it's so repressed, emerges as primitive superstition and unfounded fears. The intuitive type, forced to deal with practical realities, doesn't develop mature sensation. Instead, they become obsessively concerned with minor physical symptoms, compulsively focused on irrelevant details, or anxiously preoccupied with practical matters that have little real importance. Their sensation function, because it's so neglected, manifests as hypochondria and compulsive attention to meaningless specifics. These inferior function eruptions are more than just psychological curiosities. They're the shadow side of personality types, the price we pay for our psychological specialization. They reveal the parts of ourselves we've been unconsciously rejecting, the aspects of human experience we've decided are not worth developing. Most people, when they experience these eruptions, try to suppress them as quickly as possible. They see them as embarrassing breakdowns, temporary lapses in their normal functioning that should be ignored or medicated away. They want to get back to their comfortable dominant function as soon as possible, to return to the psychological territory where they feel competent and in control. But Jung saw these breakdowns differently. He understood them as the psyche's attempt to force growth, to push beyond the artificial limitations of one-sided development. The inferior function doesn't erupt to destroy your life. It emerges because it contains psychological resources you desperately need, but have been refusing to develop. This is where Jung's personality theory becomes truly revolutionary. He wasn't interested in helping people become better versions of their existing type. He was interested in helping them transcend their type altogether, to develop into complete human beings who could access all four functions as needed. But this development requires something most people are unwilling to give: the courage to be incompetent. Learning to use your inferior functions means accepting that you'll be bad at them initially. The thinking type learning to trust their feelings will make emotional decisions that seem irrational. The feeling type developing their thinking will make logical choices that feel cold and heartless. The sensation type exploring intuition will have insights that seem impractical and unrealistic. The intuitive type developing sensation will focus on details that seem boring and irrelevant. This process of expanding beyond your dominant type isn't just psychologically challenging, it's existentially threatening. Your personality type isn't just how you think and feel, it's who you believe you are. Developing other functions means questioning the very foundation of your identity. It means admitting that the way you've been seeing reality is incomplete, that the strengths you've been proud of are also limitations, that the aspects of other people you've been judging are actually undeveloped parts of yourself. Yet this is exactly what Jung believed was necessary for psychological health and authentic human development. He called this process individuation, the journey toward becoming a complete individual who could access the full spectrum of human psychological functioning. It's not about becoming a different person. It's about becoming the whole person you were always meant to be. The path begins with honest recognition of your dominant type and its limitations. Not the romanticized version where you celebrate your strengths while ignoring your blind spots, but the unflinching acknowledgement of how your psychological preferences have shaped and constrained your experience of reality. You must see your type not as your identity, but as your starting point, the psychological foundation from which you can begin to explore other ways of being human. This recognition leads to the most crucial insight in Jung's entire system. Your personality type is not a description of who you are. It's a description of who you've learned to be in response to early experiences, social expectations, and survival needs. It's a psychological strategy that served you well in certain circumstances, but has now become a prison that prevents you from accessing your full human potential. The question that emerges from this understanding is both simple and terrifying. If your personality type is just a learned strategy rather than your true identity, who are you really? What exists beneath the psychological patterns you've been mistaking for yourself? What becomes possible when you stop limiting yourself to just one way of processing reality? These questions lead us to the heart of Jung's vision for human development. He didn't just want to help people understand their personality types. He wanted to help them transcend them entirely. He envisioned human beings who could think clearly when thinking was needed, feel deeply when feeling was appropriate, act practically when action was required, and envision possibilities when vision was called for. Not specialists in one function, but masters of all four. But this mastery comes at a price that most people are unwilling to pay. It requires dismantling the very psychological structures you've spent your life building. It demands that you venture into territories of consciousness that feel foreign and uncomfortable. It insists that you develop aspects of yourself that you may have spent decades avoiding or despising. The journey towards psychological wholeness isn't a comfortable process of self-acceptance and positive thinking. It's a rigorous confrontation with the parts of yourself you've been refusing to acknowledge. It's an honest examination of how your greatest strengths have become your most significant limitations. It's a willingness to be temporarily incompetent in order to become permanently complete. This transformation doesn't happen through workshops or personality tests or motivational speeches. It happens through daily confrontation with your psychological limitations. It happens when you force yourself to use the functions you've been avoiding, even when it feels awkward and unnatural. It happens when you stop running from the parts of yourself that make you uncomfortable and start investigating why they make you uncomfortable. For the thinking type, this means deliberately entering situations that require emotional intelligence, not just acknowledging that feelings exist, but actually making decisions based on values and relationships rather than pure logic. It means sitting with emotions without immediately trying to analyze them away. It means learning to trust the wisdom that comes through the heart, even when the mind cannot understand or approve of it. For the feeling type, this means developing the courage to make hard decisions that might hurt people's feelings but serve a greater good. It means learning to separate objective reality from emotional reaction. It means developing the ability to think clearly even when emotions are running high. It means recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set clear boundaries, even if it temporarily disrupts harmony. For the sensation type, this means learning to trust insights that cannot be proven through direct experience. It means developing comfort with ambiguity and abstract concepts. It means allowing yourself to imagine possibilities that don't yet exist in concrete form. It means recognizing that sometimes the most practical thing you can do is plan for futures that haven't arrived yet. For the intuitive type, this means paying attention to your body, your immediate environment, and the practical details that make life function. It means learning to ground your visions in concrete reality. It means developing the patience to execute your ideas through careful attention to specifics. It means recognizing that the most brilliant insight is worthless if it cannot be translated into practical action. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. This integration process isn't about becoming well-rounded in some superficial sense. It's not about developing mediocre skills in all four areas. It's about accessing the full spectrum of human consciousness so that you can respond to life's complexity with psychological flexibility rather than rigid adherence to your preferred function. The goal isn't to stop being a thinking type or a feeling type or a sensation type or an intuitive type. The goal is to stop being limited by your type, to use it as a strength when it's appropriate while having access to other functions when your dominant type isn't sufficient for the situation at hand. This is what Jung meant by individuation, not the development of your personality type, but the development beyond your personality type. It's the recognition that you are not your psychological preferences. You are the consciousness that has learned to operate through these preferences, and you can learn to operate through other preferences as well. Most people never attempt this journey because it requires admitting that the way they've been living is fundamentally incomplete. It requires acknowledging that the identity they've built around their dominant function is actually a limitation disguised as a strength. It requires facing the uncomfortable truth that they've been living as a fraction of who they could be. But for those willing to undertake this exploration, Jung's personality types offer something extraordinary, a roadmap for becoming fully human. Not human in the limited sense of being good at one thing while remaining unconscious of everything else, but human in the complete sense of being able to access all the capacities that consciousness offers. The harsh truth about Jung's personality types isn't that you have one. It's that you've been imprisoned by one. You've confused a psychological tool with your identity. You've mistaken a learned strategy for your essential nature. You've built your entire sense of self around one way of processing reality, while remaining blind to the three other ways that are equally available to you. But this recognition, disturbing as it may be, is also liberating. Because once you see the cage you've been living in, you can begin to unlock it. Once you recognize your type as a starting point rather than a destination, you can begin the journey toward psychological wholeness. Once you understand that your greatest strength is also your greatest limitation, you can begin to develop the other dimensions of human consciousness that have been waiting patiently for your attention. The question isn't which personality type you are. The question is, are you ready to become more than your personality type? Are you willing to venture beyond the comfortable boundaries of your psychological preferences? Are you prepared to discover what becomes possible when you stop limiting yourself to just one way of being human? This is Jung's ultimate challenge to every person who encounters his work. Not to find your type and celebrate it, but to find your type and transcend it. Not to become a better thinker or feeler or sensor or intuitive, but to become a complete human being who can access all four functions as wisdom requires. The journey begins the moment you stop defending your limitations and start exploring your possibilities. It begins when you recognize that your personality type is not your prison sentence, but your starting point for the most important adventure of your life. The adventure of becoming who you truly are, beneath all the psychological strategies you've learned to survive.